To understand this verse, look at the word it sets against wealth, because the writer could have chosen any opposite, and the one he chose tells you what the verse is really about. The verse is about the person who hurries to get rich. And when the writer reaches for the opposite of that person, the contrast that will make the point, he does not choose the careful planner, he does not choose the patient saver, or the diligent worker, or the wise investor. Any of those would have made a tidy contrast about method. He chooses none of them. He chooses the faithful man. A faithful man will abound with blessings, but whoever hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. Sit with that pairing, because it is doing something unexpected. Faithful is not a money word. It is a character word. It is about reliability, steadiness, keeping faith, being the kind of person others can trust over time. And the verse sets that quality directly against the rush for wealth, as its opposite, which means the verse is not comparing a good financial method with a bad one. It is comparing two kinds of person. The problem it names is not in the technique, it is in the character. Chapter 28, verse 20. A few episodes ago, we looked at another verse about haste, the diligent man and the hasty man, where haste was a matter of method, moving before thinking. That verse could be answered by changing your sequence, pause before you begin, and the problem is largely solved. This verse is about a different kind of haste, and I told you then that it was coming, and that it would be harder, because you cannot fix this one by making a better plan. So before we go into what the verse means, let me put something on the record, or rather, notice something that would not be on the record at all. Everything this channel has asked you to look at so far has been visible. What you owe, what you signed, when your money arrived, what remains at the end of the month. All of it could be written down, counted, put on a sheet. A scribe could keep the record. But the thing this verse is about would not appear on any sheet. You cannot measure a person's haste to be rich by looking at their accounts, because two people with identical accounts, same income, same savings, same debts, can be completely different on the one axis this verse cares about. One of them is at peace with the pace of their life. The other is straining against it every day, privately, in a way that shows up in no number anywhere. This verse is about the invisible thing, the hunger underneath the numbers, that no ledger records and no scribe could ever have counted, which is exactly why the verse locates the problem in character rather than in method. Method is visible, character is not. And the verse is pointing at the part of a person that stays hidden right up until it produces a decision. Now the word faithful, because everything turns on it. The Hebrew points to firmness, steadiness, reliability, the quality of a thing you can lean on, because it does not shift. A faithful man, in this sense, is not primarily a man who believes certain things. He is a man who is steady over time, who keeps his word when keeping it costs him, who does the right thing at the slow pace the right thing usually requires, without abandoning it the moment a faster, dirtier option appears. Faithfulness is a quality that only exists across time. You cannot be faithful in an instant, because faithfulness is precisely the thing that shows up in how you behave over the long run, when no single moment would have caught you. And that is why it is the perfect opposite of hasty-to-be-rich. Because haste is the enemy of the long run. The person in a hurry to be rich is by definition unwilling to move at the pace that faithfulness requires. They want the result now, and faithfulness does not deliver now. It delivers over time, slowly, through 1,000 unglamorous acts of keeping faith, when it would have been easier and faster not to. The two orientations pull in opposite directions. One is willing to wait and keep its word. The other is not willing to wait, and the not waiting is where the word gets broken. So here is the distinction the whole verse rests on, and it is the one I promised you episodes ago. There is haste as a method, and there is haste as a hunger. Haste as a method is what we looked at before. It is a habit, moving before thinking, starting before deciding. It is fixable because it lives on the surface, in behavior. You can install a pause. You can change your sequence. The person with the method problem is not being pulled by anything deep. They simply never learn to wait, and they can learn. Haste as a hunger is different, and this verse is about the hunger. It is not a habit on the surface. It is a pull from underneath, an appetite to arrive, to have, to be rich, that is strong enough to override the pause, even when the person knows the pause is there. And before we go a step further, let me be clear about who this is not aimed at, because the word hunger can be misheard. This is not about the person rushing because their family needs to eat tonight. That is not a hunger for surplus. That is survival, and survival is not what this verse is warning against. The hunger the verse means is the appetite for more, not the need for enough. If you are hurrying because the rent is due and the children are hungry, this proverb is not describing you, and no honest reading of it could make it describe you. Hold that from the start, so nothing in the next 15 minutes lands on the wrong person. You can teach this person, the one driven by the hunger for surplus, everything the earlier verse taught. They can understand the value of patience completely, agree with it, even explain it to someone else. And they will still rush, because the rushing is not coming from ignorance of a better method. It is coming from a hunger that the better method does not touch. The mind knows to wait. The hunger will not let it. That is why the verse treats this as character and not technique. Because a hunger is not something you fix by learning a skill. It is something you have to recognize in yourself and reckon with and slowly reshape, which is the work of character, and it is much harder and much slower than changing a method. You cannot install a pause against a hunger. The hunger eats the pause. And the hardest thing about the hunger is that it does not feel like hunger from the inside. This is the part that makes it so difficult to catch in yourself. A person with the method problem can usually see it. They know they rushed. They can look back and identify the moment they moved too fast. But the hunger disguises itself as good reasons. It does not arrive in your mind announced as greed. It arrives as an opportunity you cannot afford to miss, as a window that is closing, as everyone else already moving and you being left behind, as a completely reasonable sounding argument for why, just this once, the slow, faithful step is not necessary. The hunger is a lawyer, and it is always ready with a case. It never says, "I want this so badly, I am willing to cut a corner." It says, "Any sensible person would move quickly here." And it says it so persuasively that the person cannot tell the difference between wisdom and appetite wearing the costume of wisdom. And that is exactly why the verse does not say, "Be smarter." It says, "Be faithful." A smarter person just has a cleverer lawyer, a better hunger, with a more persuasive case. The verse does not ask you to outthink the appetite, because the appetite is often the smartest voice in the room. It asks you to be the other thing entirely, steady, reliable, faithful, the quality that does not argue with the hunger at all, but simply keeps the honest step, because keeping honest steps is what it does. That is why the verse locates it in character, and why character is the only thing that answers it. Because the defense against a hunger that disguises itself as good reasons is not a better argument. The hunger will always out-argue you in the moment. The defense is a settled disposition, built in advance, in the calm times, that has already decided it will keep the faithful step even when a very good reason appears for skipping it. That disposition is what the verse calls faithfulness. It is not a feeling and it is not a rule. It is a shape the character has been given over time, so that when the hunger arrives with its excellent case, the person does not have to win the argument. They have already, long ago, decided not to have it. Now let me show you where the hunger reveals itself, because it has a signature, and the ancient world knew the signature well. The hunger to be rich shows itself in what a person is willing to skip. That is its tell, not in how hard they work. The hungry are often tremendously hard workers. It shows in the corners they are willing to cut to arrive faster. The person moving at the pace of faithfulness does the whole thing. The slow, honest steps, the keeping of the word, the paying of what is owed, the care for the people the work touches. The person driven by the hunger looks for the step that can be skipped, the obligation that can be quietly dropped, the corner where honesty is expensive and no one is watching. The hunger does not announce itself as greed, it announces itself as a series of small permissions to skip the slow, faithful step in favor of the fast one. And in the ancient world, those skipped steps had names: the false balance, a scale quietly weighted to cheat the buyer, which we will spend a whole episode on; the withheld wage, paying the laborer late or less, because holding his money a little longer served the rush. Neither is a strategy for building wealth slowly and well. Each is a corner cut by someone in a hurry to have more, faster than honest means would allow. The hunger, in that world, left fingerprints, and every fingerprint was a faithful step skipped in favor of a fast one. And once you see that this verse is about the hunger and its skipped steps, you start to notice that the corpus returns to exactly this pattern again and again, which is how you know you are reading it right, because a true theme in this literature never appears only once. The book says elsewhere that a faithful witness will not lie, but a false witness breathes out lies, the same faithful set against the same willingness to cut the honest corner. It says a man with an evil eye hastens after wealth and does not know that want will come upon him. Nearly the same sentence as our verse, the same hurry, the same hidden cost arriving later. It says wealth gained hastily will dwindle, which we spent a whole episode on, and better is a little with righteousness than great revenues with injustice, which sets the faithful little directly against the unfaithful much. Over and over, in different words, the same distinction: not wealth against poverty, but the faithful road against the hungry shortcut. When a theme recurs that many times, in that many forms, it is not a stray remark. It is one of the load-bearing observations of the whole book, and our verse is one of its clearest single statements. That consistency is itself the argument. If this were really a verse about money technique, it would sit alone, a stray practical tip. Instead, it sits inside a dense web of verses, all making the same character point from different angles, which tells you, before you have analyzed a single word, what kind of verse it must be. It belongs to the character family, not the technique family, and it has a great many siblings. Which brings us to what the verse says happens to such a person. Whoever hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. Now, that phrase is easy to hear as a threat, as though a punishment is going to be sent from outside, dropped on the hasty person by an angry hand. But that is not quite what the words are doing, and the difference matters. Will not go unpunished is the language of consequence, not of external penalty. It describes something that follows from the thing itself, the way a natural result follows a cause. The person who cuts the faithful steps to arrive faster is building on skipped foundations, and skipped foundations do not hold. The withheld wages breed the enemy. The false balance, once discovered, destroys the trust that all future business depends on. The hunger's shortcuts each carry their own delayed cost, and the costs come due, not because a hand reaches down to punish, but because that is simply what happens to wealth, built by skipping the things that make wealth hold. The punishment is not added to the haste from outside. It is baked into the haste from the start, which brings the principle down to the part of you that no ledger can see. The problem was never the speed of your hands, it was the hunger underneath them. That is the line. This verse is not asking you to work more slowly. You can work as hard and as fast as you like, at the honest steps. It is asking you to look at the thing driving the work, and to notice whether it is faithfulness, which can wait, or hunger, which cannot. Because the hunger is the thing that will, eventually, ask you to skip a faithful step. And the day you skip it is the day the punishment the verse describes begins quietly assembling whatever the numbers say in the moment. Now the part that has to be said with great care, because this verse is very easy to turn into a weapon, and it was not written as one. This verse does not say that wealth is the problem. It does not say the rich are wicked, or that wanting a better life is a sin, or that ambition is corruption. Read it again, The object of the warning is not wealth, it is the hunger, the hastening, the willingness to skip the faithful step. A person can become genuinely, greatly wealthy through faithfulness, slowly, honestly, at the pace the right way requires, and the verse has nothing against them. The first half of the verse blesses it. The faithful man will abound. Abounding is not condemned. The rush to abound by unfaithful means is. And it does not say that everyone who is in a hurry has bad character. We already drew this line at the start, and it holds here. The person driven by a hunger for surplus is not the same as the person hurrying because their family needs to eat this month. The verse is aimed at the hunger for more that overrides faithfulness, never at the desperation of genuine need. Reading it as though it condemns every anxious, hurrying poor person is one of the cruelest misreadings available, and this channel will not make it. There is a real tension in the corpus here too, and it is worth naming. The same book that warns so sharply against the hunger to be rich also, elsewhere, praises wealth as a blessing, speaks well of the diligent who prosper, and holds up the leaving of an inheritance as a good. So is wealth good or dangerous? Both. And the verse tells you exactly which is which. Wealth arrived at faithfully is a blessing the corpus celebrates. Wealth chased by a hunger that skips the faithful steps carries its own punishment. Same wealth. The entire difference is the character of the road taken to reach it, which is precisely what this verse is about, and precisely why it chose faithfulness as the opposite rather than patience. And there is one thing the verse is careful never to promise, and honesty requires pointing at it directly. It does not promise that the faithful man will get rich. Read the first half again. A faithful man will abound with blessings. Blessings, not necessarily riches. The corpus is emphatic elsewhere that faithfulness is its own kind of abundance, and it deliberately does not guarantee that the faithful person ends up wealthy. Plenty of deeply faithful people are not rich, and the verse never suggested they would be. It promised them blessing, which is a wider and more honest word than wealth, and it left the rich or not question exactly where reality leaves it, unpromised. So here is this week's task, and it is a reading. Do not read this verse alone. Read the whole chapter it lives in, Proverbs 28, the entire thing, in one sitting. It is short. It will take a few minutes. And as you read, watch the company this verse keeps. Notice what surrounds it. Because the hasty-to-be-rich verse is not sitting in a chapter about financial technique, tucked among tips on saving and investing. Look at its neighbors. The chapter is full of justice and injustice, the treatment of the poor, honesty and dishonesty, oppression and integrity. That is the neighborhood this verse lives in. And a verse is colored by its neighbors. The company it keeps tells you what kind of verse it is. Read the chapter, and you will see with your own eyes that this was never a money technique verse. It was always a character verse, sitting among other character verses, and it only looks like a money verse when you tear it out of the street it lives on. That is the task. Read the street, not just the house. It is the single best way to keep any proverb from being twisted. See what it lives next to. For any actual decision where the hunger might be pulling at you, the same principle this series keeps returning to holds. Bring in someone steady who can see what you cannot, and who is not caught in the same hurry, because the hunger is very good at hiding its shortcuts from the person who has it, and very visible to someone who does not. A faithful man against the one who hastens to be rich, not a planner against a fool, a character against a hunger. The verse chose its opposite carefully, and the choice is the whole teaching. So the question for the comments is this. Read the whole of Proverbs 28, and then tell us what surprised you about the company this verse keeps. What is it sitting next to that you did not expect? Be specific about the neighbors, because the specific observations help someone else read it properly, in its street, instead of alone. Tell us. We read them. You have probably noticed that this channel keeps refusing the easy version, the one that would let us call wealth wicked, or promise that faithfulness pays in cash. We keep drawing the finer line the text actually draws. If that is the version of this subject you have been looking for, subscribe, because the next episode closes this first phase of the series, and it does it by naming the one thing the text says is worth more than great riches. After 9 episodes, largely about difficulty and danger, the 10th lifts its eyes to something the corpus values above wealth entirely. A thing you cannot rush, cannot inherit, and cannot fake, built only over exactly the kind of faithful time this verse is about. That is where we go next.